Welcome back. In this episode, we're going to be looking at chapter 13 of the book of Job. And this chapter is also a continuation of chapter 12, where Job was responding to one of his friends, the dialogue they were having. Verse 1, he says, "Behold, my eyes have seen all this, my ear has heard and understood it." And I'd like to just stop there because one of the things that fascinated me about this book is the fact that there's so many statements, really in a lot of aspects, a lot of places in scriptures that you will see things that have been said that we can actually use as prayer. And in this case, I would pray that when our eyes see things and our ear hear things, that we will have understanding of it in Jesus' name. Because there are times that people see, and for one reason or the other, they don't have understanding, or they hear and they don't have understanding. So it is a thing, and it is something that we can actually pray about. So in verse 2, "What you know, I also know. I am not inferior to you." Now, Job is responding to his friend because they have been insisting that he must have done something which has made the Lord to allow those kind of things as a punishment for him, the situation he found himself. And he was responding to all of them. I think about three of them have spoken to him now at this stage and making them know that what they are trying to use, all the different principles that they are trying to use to prove the fact that it is a consequence of his actions, are not correct. They are not necessarily applicable to him. And we know that because we know the reason why Job is in this situation. So that's why he said to him that what you know, I know. And also, I am not inferior to you. And further in verse 3, it says, "But I would speak to the Almighty, and I desire to reason with God." When I read this, I thought Job may not have, or in these times, they may not necessarily have related to God as if God is their father or said it expressly, but we can see Job and some other characters in scriptures that have a relationship with God that makes them feel as if they can actually ask God things and be open and sincere to God. So in this case, Job is behaving like somebody like that he feels, he's saying to his friend, let me be, I have a relationship with God. I'm able to talk to him and make bear my mind with regards to the situation I am in to him. And it is what you would do if you have a relationship with somebody. In this case, God's relationship, Job's relationship with God. So he went on and said in verse 4, "But you forgers of lies, you are all worthless physicians." Why would he call them this? I think they came when they heard that Job was in that situation, hopefully to console him, but they're not doing that here. I'm not 100% sure what their thoughts was before they came and actually saw Job and really had started having conversations with him. But they're not trying to soothe his pain at all. In all they've been saying, in all the conversations they've been having with him, it hasn't been soothing. So I suppose that's why Job said here, "You are worthless physicians." And in verse 5, it says, "Oh, that you would be silent, and it would be your wisdom." And it will be your wisdom. Certainly, if they're saying things that is not of value, and possibly that is applicable to us in this day and age as well. It's better to be quiet than say something that is not of value to people, particularly somebody that's in a very sensitive and tender situation like Job is. So that is wisdom from here. "Now hear my reasoning and heed the pleading of my lips. Will you speak wickedly of God and talk deceitfully of him? Will you show partiality for him? Will you contend for God?" So there's some parts of this saying that I'm not quite sure I understand, like him saying, "Would they speak wickedly of God?" Actually, maybe I understand because what they're trying to push on him is the fact that God has brought this upon him because he's done something. And maybe we should pause for a while and think about the scale of what's happened to Job. How can that be the punishment for somebody? For you to lose all your grown children 10 of them. He lost his properties. He lost his business. How much value of how I can't even consider what they're trying to insinuate that the scale of Job's sin is worth that value of loss. It's not imaginable. And they're trying to put themselves in a position where they're they think they know the value of the equivalent value of the punishment that Job should have for the sins he has committed. In other words, his sin must have been so grievous that the what God allowed for as his punishment is a measure of the sin. I don't think they're in a position to do that. Maybe that's why Job is saying that they speak wickedly of God and talk deceitfully of him and will show partiality for him. So, what do you think? Carrying on in verse 9, Job said, will it be well when he searches you out? Now he's turned the table on them that would God see them? Now carrying on to verse 9, Job said, will it be well when he searches you out? In other words, Job turned the table on them and saying, what if you're in my position? When it's your turn, what are we going to find? Is there any skeleton in your cupboard? Would the scale of punishment be the same? Or the offense that they would have committed, would God punish them as duly as he's doing to him? And then he said, or can you mock him as one mocks a man? Because if they were in Job's position, so it's their turn to be so to say, judged for their sins, would they still be saying the same things? Would they still be able to take the same position as they're taking now? That's my understanding of what he's saying here. And in verse 10, he said, he will surely rebuke you if you secretly show partiality. Will not his excellence make you afraid, and the dread of him fall upon you? Your platitude are proverbs of ashes. Your defenses are defenses of clay. Hold your peace with me and let me speak. So saying to them, just leave me alone. Let me express myself. Let me say what I think. After all, Job has nothing to lose, so to say, because he's already lost everything. And who in that situation would not want to seek answers, would not be thinking, even if you're not challenging God, wanting to know why do I have to face this scale of calamity? So I think in a sense, Job is right. Then carrying on in verse 13, it says, then let's calm me, that's me. Why do I take my flesh in my teeth and put my life in my hands? Though he slay me, yet I will trust him. When I read this, I remembered, I think it's Habakkuk. The prophet Habakkuk was complaining to the Lord about the behavior, the situation that was in the land then of Israel, and saying that, the poor were being molested and the injustice and all of those things. And he was saying to God, do something, Lord, do something. And then the Lord said, finally answered him and said, oh, I am doing something. I'm preparing the Babylonians to come and deal with this people. And then he said, no, Lord, the Babylonians are too brutal people to come and deal with the Israelites. And the Lord said, well, that's what's going to happen. So, take a piece of, sound the alarm and go and publicize it, that's what's going to happen. Eventually, when he saw sense in what God was going to do, even though it was not for it originally, he now said the same thing. I remember the same thing he said, that though the fig trees are barren and the cattle all die and the crops are failed, yet will I rejoice in the Lord. He said that because despite the fact that he understood the scale of the destruction that is approaching, he knew that God had a purpose. God had the best interest of the people at heart, and God is just. God is in control of all situation, and so he was able to say that. And I see Job coming to that, coming up with that same thing same understanding from what he said in verse 15. Though he slay me, yet I will trust in him. The second part of that verse, Job still went ahead to tell or to prove his position to his friend by saying, even so, I will defend my own ways before him. Of course, God is his father and he's able to speak to him to bear his mind and wanting to understand situation. We can do the same as children of God. So he said, he also shall be my salvation, even in this situation. Yes, I am questioning, I am wanting to know why this is the situation, but I know that it's still God and only God alone can save me from this situation. This tells us about the level of trust that Job had in the Lord and a reflection of his relationship with the Lord. So in verse 16, it carries on and says that for a hypocrite could not come before him. I imagine that he's saying that because, if he just wanted to be a religious person, possibly he would have, with all the experiences he's having, things he's going through, he would just be mute and not express himself and not say what is really bothering him. And I think one lesson I'm taking away from this is that even if we're putting up an outward appearance of all is well, God still sees our heart. And Job is choosing not to be a hypocrite, to be sincere, of course, in his heart, because God sees his heart, and also in the things he was talking about to his friend, so that they can know his state and how he's viewing the situation he finds himself. Is being very plain with them, though they don't like that. And now in verse 17, he said, listen carefully to my speech and to my declaration with your ears. See now, I have prepared my case. I know that I shall be vindicated. Who is he who will contend with me? If now I hold my tongue, I perish. So I think, he's just making his stand again known as a statement unto, who is he responding to here? Zophar. Is Zophar that spoke in chapter 11 and saying to him that, look, you can't make me change my mind. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to stand my ground. I will speak and let my mind be known unto you. I think we should be able to do that as well. We should be sincere with ourselves. We should be able to express indeed the way we feel, particularly with people that we say are friends, because these people are his friends. They came all the way, different places. We know they're all not in the same place, so they must have traveled far to be with him. And if they can be bothered to come all that way, I think they could have gone an extra mile to allow Job to be himself and to show some empathy, which it's very lacking in the way we have seen them present themselves in all the conversations they've been having with Job. So in a sense, Job is right in telling them off and taking a stand with regards to all the conversations that they've been having. What do you think? Job carried on in verse 20 and said, only two things do not to me, then I will not hide myself from you. Withdraw your hand far from me, and let not the dread of you make me afraid. This is incredible. Despite his situation, this is him now talking to God. I don't think he was talking to his friend here. He's talking to God, that God should not, take away his hand from him. So he would rather, I remember the story of when David counted the children of Israel and the Lord was angry with him. And God said he should choose. The prophet came, I think, and said, this is what the Lord said. He laid out three punishment and asked David to pick one. And David did not really pick one. He just said, oh Lord, it's better to fall into your hands than, the hands of his enemies, because one of the options was for their enemies to deal with them. So exactly this is what Job is saying here, in a sense saying, well, even if God, you're the one that's done all of this to me, I would rather still be, under your control and let your hand still be there on my life than you withdrawing from me. So I think that's an incredible thing to say, and it just again tells you the depth of his understanding and relationship with the Lord. And I pray that God will help us to be in that kind of deep, to have that kind of deep understanding and relationship with God, that we can actually surrender all to God and allow Him to be the master of our life indeed, and the Lord of our lives indeed. So he carried on in verse 22 and said, "Then call and I will answer, or let me speak, then you respond to me." So he wants that communication. He wants that conversation with God. He wants that line to be open. Now he said in verse 23, "How many are my iniquities and my sins? Make me know my transgression and my sin. Why do you hide your face and regard me as enemy?" Certainly he's speaking to God, we can see from here. "Will you frighten a leaf driven to and fro, and will you pursue dry stubble? For you write bitter things against me and make me inherit the iniquity of my youth." So Job is not claiming innocence, so to say. He's just, sometimes I feel like we saw, I think it's in chapter 11, no, chapter 9, 8, 9, and 10, we saw that sometimes what he says, from the things he said, I sense he was confused, and later he confirmed himself that he was confused of the whole thing, the situation, what's happened to him, and not hearing from God, I suppose, makes him to be more confused. And sometimes, the things he says, you can tell that he's not sure, and I can understand that. So I think that must be one of the disappointments he also is trying to express with his friends, that can they not see that he needs answers for the situation he's found himself. And that must have been very disappointing, I think, to him in regards to what they are able to offer to him as friends. So carrying on from verse 27, he now said, "You put my feet in the stocks and watch closely all my path. You set a limit for the soles of my feet. Man decays like a rotten thing, like a garment that is moth eaten." So I don't think Job would have seen himself coming out of this situation. I sincerely think that he sincerely believes that this is the end for him, and it's probably going to, he was already ill anyway, he was already sick, lost everything, and he probably thinks that it's going to go downwards until the end now, because we saw in earlier chapters where he actually was wishing himself dead. So from my understanding, I think he doesn't see how he's going to get out of this, and I can understand that. What do you think? So I hope this episode has been useful to you, or you've been able to get something out of it. If so, I would like you to share with your friends if you are what you're listening on the podcast, and also maybe come to see some more of my content on YouTube. And next episode is going to be on chapter 14 of Job, because we're just on chapter 13 now. So thank you for listening and spending some time with me, and hope to see you next time. Bye.